The vortex hurled them out with a shriek of twisting air, depositing Malvaris and Varina onto a hard, uneven surface that grated underfoot. Malvaris stumbled, clutching her broomstick for balance as she glanced down. Loose, jagged stones lay scattered beneath her boots, packed together yet shifting slightly with each step. Strange and unpleasant, unlike any road she'd known. Without pause, she spun around, her wand tracing a swift hex pattern to seal the portal behind them. Whether Glinda had glimpsed it before it vanished would soon become clear. Malvaris exchanged a glance with her sister. No words passed between them, but the truth hung heavy and undeniable. This was not Oz. The portal had worked, despite the difference in that one weave. The early morning light cast a pale glow over the streets, the sun barely above the horizon, stretching long shadows across the uneven ground. They were in a city like none they had ever seen. Chimneys rose in clusters along the rooftops, streaking the sky with soot, while the air carried the faint, acrid tang of smoke and metal. They were in the Kansas land Dorothy Gale had spoken of. Malvaris found it dull and almost colourless compared to Oz. This is what the girl had been so eager to get back to, Malvaris wondered. A man in white, carrying a wooden box filled with strange glass vessels, slowed as he passed. He cast a wary glance at them, hesitating for a moment before continuing to one of the wooden dens. There he placed one of the vessels near the door, knocked softly, and hurried away. Around them rose rows of strange wooden structures, pressed together in neat lines. They bore none of the charm or magic of the Emerald City's grand towers or the Munchkins' quaint, colourful homes. These shapes were dull, their walls painted in faded hues that time and weather had stripped of life. Two men trudged past, their heavy boots crunching on the ground. One nudged the other, gesturing toward the witches. "Carnival folk, maybe," he muttered. The other gave a low snort. "Fortune-tellers, perhaps. Don't look right, though." Both cast lingering glances before continuing on. Malvaris's gaze swept over the scene. Beneath the rising light of dawn, these wooden shells were ringed by rough-cut barriers, crooked and splintered as though hastily constructed. In front of one, a small platform of warped planks jutted out, its edges uneven, with a strange swaying contraption creaking faintly in the breeze. Beyond, a barren patch of dirt held a crude tub and an overturned metal vessel. Everything here seemed worn, utilitarian, and utterly devoid of the vibrant enchantment she had known in Oz. Varina sniffed the air and grimaced. "What kind of land is this?" she muttered. "Why live in narrow cages, cramped together like beasts?" Malvaris tilted her head, frowning at the dull, rigid world around them. "Can you pick up her scent?" Varina's nostrils flared as they moved through the maze of narrow streets, her head tilting sharply with every pause. She sniffed the air with an animalistic focus that grated on Malvaris's nerves. The girl had been close, barely moments ago. Glinda's portal couldn't have opened far from here. Yet they wandered aimlessly, crossing one gritty street after another, as Varina paused near chimneys and corners to sniff the air like a hound. All the while, they were forced to endure the strange sights, sounds, and odours of Kansas land. It disgusted Malvaris. The stench of animal feces lingered on every street. How Varina could tolerate it with that nose of hers, Malvaris might never know. Malvaris scanned the strange streets, her ears straining for any sound that might belong to the girl. Instead, she was met with wary stares from passing oddly dressed men and women, their glances heavy with suspicion before they quickly turned away. The air was filled with meaningless noise, muffled chatter drifting from within the wooden buildings, distant footsteps echoing from the streets beyond. Each sound grated against her nerves, and the persistent ache of the rot clawing at her insides made the effort all the more maddening. Knowing how close she was to having the slippers didn't help matters either. The girl was here somewhere with the slippers, in a land that seemed to have no magic at all, a land that would offer the girl no protection. The slippers themselves would be her only defence, and she didn't know how to use them. Taking them off the girl without damaging them, though, would be a delicate task, but the slippers would be hers soon, and her fate would be altered. Malvaris glanced at her sister, her only real obstacle once the girl was found. Days ago, when this had begun, she'd been intent on killing one sister to gain the slippers, and it looked like she would still have to carry through on that grim task. But only if her half-dog sister found the brat's scent. Varina even looked like a dog, bent over and sniffing as she walked. In another mood, Malvaris might have found the thought amusing enough to laugh. Varina said, "I got her! This way! Come, we have her now!" The witches followed the trail, their footsteps silent against the gritty surface. The scent led them to a wooden structure slightly smaller than its neighbours, its siding faded and worn. The sloping top of the shell exhaled a thin curl of smoke, and its front was guarded by a warped platform raised just above the ground. Varina stopped, pointing with her broomstick. "There," she said, her voice thick with disdain. "That one. Has the stink of the girl all over it." Malvaris studied the structure. She focused, her senses attuning to the faint sounds from within. The clinking of dishes, the soft scrape of wood against wood. A woman's voice humming, a low, steady melody. She seemed to be preparing food, the scent of frying meat and bitter liquid wafted faintly through the walls. Further back, perhaps behind the house itself, a wooden door creaked open and shut. There was a pause, followed by the faint sound of a trickling stream. Malvaris's lip curled. A man, emptying himself, her fingers tightened on the broomstick. Varina's nose must have been wrong. Dorothy wasn't here. If she were, this place would be frantic. Parents scrambling to question a girl who had vanished for days, hugging their lost child, and weeping for joy. Dorothy, too, would be overjoyed, breathless as she told her tale of witches, slippers, the Emerald City, a man made of straw, another of tin, and a talking lion. All things strange to this land, Malvaris wagered. Instead, these people went about their early morning routines. But then the woman called out, "Dorothy, hurry now, or you'll miss morning bell." From the back of the small house came the answering call, a cheerful,
"Okay, Mama."
Then what might have been the back door opened and closed. "She's here," Malvaris said. "I heard her. She's here after all." A sharp twinge lanced through her gut. Malvaris forced her expression to remain cold and unreadable, enduring the pain in silence as she waited for it to subside before speaking again. If her sister discovered her weakness now, it would be disastrous. A clear advantage Varina could exploit with an amplifying spell in the coming battle for the slippers. The pain would become crippling, leaving Malvaris utterly defenceless. She reminded herself with steely resolve that the rot would soon be gone, its relentless grip broken. Freedom was close, and she wouldn't falter now. But care was needed. Killing the girl outright could ruin the magic. Such artifacts became dangerously bound to their wearers. Hurting the parents, though, that would break the child's spirit. Dorothy would hand over the slippers willingly to save them. It was simple, effective. Without warning, intense heat flared behind her, and a massive fireball roared past her, slamming into the house. The explosion shook the ground, a deafening crack ripping through the stillness as flames erupted skyward. The structure was nearly obliterated in an instant. Walls splintered apart, and the roof caved in, sending flaming debris cascading to the ground. Tall flames roared upward, smoke billowing thick into the sky. What remained of the house was an inferno. The sheer force of the blast left no doubt. No one inside could have survived. "You fool!" Malvaris snarled, her voice cutting through the crackling roar of the flames. She stared at the blazing remains of the house, her thoughts tumbling in chaotic waves. The slippers, their salvation, were gone. The shock rooted her in place, disbelief and despair battling for dominance. Her one chance to cure the rot, to escape an agonizing, bedridden end, had been snuffed out in an instant. The injustice of it struck like a blow to her chest. They had been so close, the slippers within reach, her salvation almost hers. Now, everything was ash and ruin. Her chance to escape the rot, to claw her way free of the torment consuming her, was gone. The first stab pierced through muscle and bone, and Malvaris gasped, a strangled cry tearing from her throat. Before she could react, the dagger plunged again, brutal and merciless. The wet, searing agony tore through her, and she knew instantly who wielded the blade. Her legs buckled as blood spilled in warm, heavy streams down her sides, pooling beneath her as she crumpled to the ground. The roaring flames blurred in her vision, flickering in jagged patterns as her thoughts unravelled into fury and despair. Varina loomed above her, a bloodied dagger in her grip, her expression a mask of fury and satisfaction. "You always thought yourself so clever," Varina said, kneeling to yank the enchanted eye from around Malvaris's neck. "But I know the truth. Dracana's house didn't fall by accident. I smelt your magic on it. Your taint. Didn't know I could smell magic, did you? Never tell an enemy your strengths. Did you plan it, or was it luck? Either way, you murdered our ken for those blasted slippers." Malvaris's jaw tightened, her breath shallow as another stab of pain gripped her gut, making the wounds in her back all the more agonizing. Gasping through the pain, she rasped, "You're wrong, I was nowhere near—" "Liar!" Varina spat, cutting her off. "You would have killed me too. Maybe not today, but soon enough. For the slippers. If we'd taken them off the girl, my days would be short. It's a pity they are lost, but Dracana and Zoris are avenged. That's all I need." Malvaris gasped. "You burning idiot. She had the slippers. Not me." Varina said the girl was no sorceress, no witch. Houses don't fall out of the sky, not even in Oz without some help. I don't know how she ended up with the slippers, but your stink was all over that house. Malvaris didn't waste her breath denying it again. Her sister was lost to madness, and the truth no longer mattered. Her blood spread in a dark pool beneath her, warm and thick, seeping into the ground. "Always the fool," she rasped, her lips curling faintly into a grin, despite the agony. "You should have waited, slipped the knife in after I brought us back to Oz. But now you're trapped here." Varina paused, standing over her dying sister. Then, with a cruel smile, she held up the enchanted eye. "Am I? You studied Glinda's weaves, I studied yours," she said, laughing. Mounting her broom, she flew into the brightening sun, her laughter echoing over the people emerging from the buildings, drawn by the fire. A woman screamed, clutching her shawl as she pointed to the witch, soaring into the brightening sky, her broom trailing smoke. Gasps rippled through the crowd as others stepped back in fear, their eyes darting between the blazing house and the figure in flight. A man shouted for buckets, his voice cutting through the rising chaos, and others scrambled to form a chain, drawing water from a nearby pump. The acrid stench of smoke mingled with the sharp tang of fear in the air as people rushed to douse the flames, licking hungrily at what little remained of the house. None dared approach the dying witch, sprawled on the ground. Malvaris lay slumped, blood pooling beneath her, her breaths shallow and ragged. Murmurs spread among the crowd, growing louder with every second. "What do we do with her?" one voice asked, trembling with uncertainty. "Burn her!" cried another. "She's Satan's bride!" The calls for violence gained momentum, though none yet stepped forward. They hovered in indecision, caught between fear and their desire to act, their faces pale and uncertain in the flickering firelight. Malvaris let out a low, bitter chuckle, the sound rattling from her bloodied lips. The irony of it burned deeper than her wounds. Not a slow, agonizing death stretched over years, as the rot had promised, but here, in this strange, alien land, surrounded by gawking idiots. She would die in this Kansas land, nameless and despised, a curiosity to these fearful, ignorant people. The thought clawed at her, filling her final moments with a fury that flickered as her strength ebbed away. But then her keen hearing picked up a sound from the other side of the burning home. A cough, a small voice calling, hoarse and frightened.
"Mommy? Daddy?"
Her mind snapped back into focus. Dorothy, the girl was alive. More important, the slippers might not have burned in the fire after all. She had hope yet. Could the slippers heal stab wounds? She didn't know. It was a chance, though. Summoning every ounce of strength, Malvaris forced herself onto her hands and knees. Pain knifed through her gut, radiating outwards like fire, licking her insides, sharp and unforgiving. Blood poured steadily from her wounds, pooling beneath her and soaking the scorched ground. The constant dull ache of the rot gnawed at her alongside the fresh agony of Varina's dagger, their combined torment threatening to overwhelm her. Her breaths came shallow and sharp, each one a struggle. But the thought of the silver slippers, their magic, their salvation, burned brighter than the pain. Her vision swam, but she forced her body to move. Clenching her teeth, she hauled herself upright, staggering as her legs threatened to give way beneath her. The world tilted dangerously, the edges of her vision blurring, but she kept moving. No one tried to help, no one got in her way. The air grew thicker with smoke as she dragged herself along the side of the burning house. Each step sent jagged spikes of agony through her body, but she refused to stop. Her iron will kept her going, one shaky step at a time. The flames roared, their heat blistering her skin, relentless and suffocating. Embers floated in the air, landing on her cloak, her exposed arms, her hair, stinging where they touched. She barely noticed. Her focus had narrowed to a singular purpose: the slippers. She rounded the corner, her knees buckling, and sank back to the ground. The motion wrenched a fresh wave of pain from her, and she bit back a cry, her fingers clawing into the dirt to steady herself. Her visions swam as she stared at the ground, willing herself to lift her head. Through the haze, she heard it again. Coughing. There. Her head snapped up and she saw her. Dorothy stood hunched in the backyard, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The girl's small frame was illuminated by the inferno, her frightened face streaked with soot and tears. Behind her was a rickety outhouse, the door standing open. Needing to relieve herself had saved her life. What luck this girl has, Malvaris thought ruefully. Triumph flickered faintly in Malvaris. She had found her. But confusion quickly overshadowed it. Dorothy looked younger than before, her face softer, her stature smaller. A child, not the teen girl who had stood victorious in Oz. And then came the greater shock. Her feet were bare, the slippers were nowhere to be seen. The fool girl left them in the house. No, that's not it. And then, the thunderous realization. Her mind reeled as she collapsed to the ground, her body no longer obeying her iron will. The portal. It had not only opened a door between worlds, it had twisted time. The one weave the enchanted eye had said was right, even though her own memory said was wrong. This wasn't the Dorothy who had gone to Oz. This was Dorothy before her journey began. Of course, she thought weakly, as the image of the girl in the Quadling town square blurred into her fading mind. The farm, Aunt Em, Uncle Henry. She should have realized it from the beginning, should have known something was amiss when the portal deposited them in a city instead of the quiet fields of a farm. Malvaris lay crumpled on the ground, her body betraying her as the rot's relentless ache merged with the stabbing agony of her wounds. Each shallow breath sent fresh waves of searing pain through her chest, her strength draining with the blood pooling beneath her. The world swirled around her, a kaleidoscope of smoke, fire, and shifting shadows, the ground beneath her a cold, unyielding reminder of her impending end. Dorothy gasped and ran over to her.
Are you okay?
Dorothy asked, tears streaming down her soot-streaked face. She crouched beside Malvaris, her voice trembling.
What can I do?
Malvaris stared up at her, her thoughts muddled by agony and desperation. Dorothy's wide, tear-streaked face hovered above her, framed by the flickering glow of the fire. Even now, with her home in ruins and her voice raw from coughing, the girl's compassion burned brightly. A goodness so pure it was infuriating. Malvaris despised it, envied it. It was the kind of strength she had long since abandoned. But she shoved those thoughts aside, her mind snapping back to her own survival. There had to be a way, even now, without the slippers, without the enchanted eye. She refused to let it end for her here, broken and powerless in this wretched place. With this blasted girl's hand on her shoulder, a sharp pain lanced through her gut, doubling the torment already ravaging her body. She clenched her jaw, refusing to cry out, though every nerve screamed. The rot was tightening its grip, and she knew she had only moments left before her body gave out completely. Fragments of forbidden knowledge surfaced in Malvaris's mind, memories clawing their way back through the haze of pain. The incantation had been whispered in dark corners, passed between witches with bloodied hands and desperate eyes. It was not meant for survival. It was an act of final defiance, a way to anchor one's power to another before death could claim it. She had dismissed it as reckless, unworthy of her. Until now. Her breath rattled as she stared into Dorothy's trembling form, the answer laid bare before her. Her lips moved, forming the faintest trace of a spell, each whispered word like a drop of blood spilled into the air. It was an ancient incantation, forbidden and volatile, a gamble with forces far beyond her failing strength. Malvaris didn't care. She had nothing left to lose. The magic stirred weakly at first, then surged wild and sharp as her fading will latched onto the girl's essence, tethering it to her own. Dorothy's brow furrowed, her concern shifting to confusion as her body tensed.
What are you doing?
She asked, her voice low, more puzzled than alarmed, though her hand instinctively moved to pull away. Malvaris's fingers shot out, closing around Dorothy's arm with startling force, surprising even herself with the strength that surged through her failing body. "Stay," Malvaris hissed. "You'll understand soon enough." The spell pulsed, raw and ancient, as Malvaris poured what little remained of her power into the binding. She felt herself tearing free from her body, a sensation like being ripped apart, thread by thread. The cold, wet earth beneath her disappeared, replaced by a fleeting weightlessness that sent her mind spiraling. Then came the pull, violent, all-consuming, as though she were being dragged through a narrow, burning tunnel. And then she hit something solid. Dorothy. The girl's essence shimmered like a delicate web, and Malvaris latched on, feeling her own thoughts thread themselves into the girl's being. It was overwhelming and suffocating, but she pushed forward, her will dominating, her grasp tightening. The pain in her body vanished, replaced by a suffocating darkness. For a moment there was nothing, only silence and cold, but then she felt it. Light returned, and with it, warmth and breath. She blinked, and the world sharpened. But the eyes through which she now saw were not her own. The jarring sight of her bloodied, lifeless body, sprawled on the ground, sent a ripple of disorientation through her mind. The corpse was pitifully frail, gaunt, aged beyond its years, and unmistakably ravaged by sickness. It had been so obvious, painfully so. Varina must have noticed, must have known all along, and yet hadn't cared enough to say a word. I was such a fool, Malvaris thought bitterly, to believe the secret of the rot had been mine alone. She felt the girl's emotions rushing around her, fear, confusion, grief, but she was there, rooted deep inside Dorothy's mind, alive. A wicked smile tugged at her consciousness, unseen by anyone. Her plans had failed, but she'd survived. And survival was enough, for now. She settled back in Dorothy's mind, content to be a passenger while she regrouped and thought of next steps.